Got it. Okay, can everyone see that title slide? Okay, perfect. So this is really hard for me. I am I got promoted, I think, Donna. I'm the Director of Outreach and Education and Stewardship, not the Director of the Great Swamp Watershed Association. But I am used to giving presentations in person, walking around. You know, I use my hands to talk. So to talk through a computer screen is hard for me. I may get some assistance from Indigo, who is my COVID kitty. She seems to like to jump in on these presentations. So I feel a little bit like I'm preaching to the choir tonight because NABA has so much expertise in sort of native species and pollinators. But what I thought I would talk a little bit about is a program, what we do generally as an organization. We've changed what we do in the last 5 or 6 years and expanded our mission. And also a program that we've had for about a decade now that is evolving and growing that we call our Watershed Friendly Living program. So some of this may be old news to you, and hopefully some of it will be useful new news. So I put a butterfly in here. It was a tappy before. I put a monarch in here for you guys. But, you know, Great Swamp Watershed Association has been around for a long time. We spend a lot of time often differentiating ourselves from the Great Swamp National Wildlife Refuge. We partner with them on many programs, but we, as Donna said, are a 501c3 and work on water quality issues. And our sort of main mission is that we support this one river, one community vision for the communities from the headwaters of the Passaic all the way down to where it meets Newark Bay. And, you know, my role as education and stewardship and outreach person is to really build understanding that the health of the water is directly and intrinsically linked to what goes on in the land around. And so it's you know, great that we can protect the Passaic River, but unless we're also working on the landmass that flows into the river, we're not going to be doing a good job. So we have 4 prongs to our mission. I put education first because I feel like it's the most important one. And we, you know, educate on sort of current and future water and environmental issues. So that's all underpinned by our water quality data. We will jump in and advocate if we need to. And then we are a land steward. We own a very small piece of the Great Swamp Watershed, about 73 acres in Harding, right off exit 33. Harcher Road is our property. I might think that it's right next to the highway. It couldn't be, you know, that great, but it has a really interesting piece of floodplain forest, and we'll talk a little bit more about what's going on there. So, you know, my goal, I'm an ecologist by training, and I've been in this country for close to 28 years now. But throughout all of the work I've done, my focus has always been, I think, on building awareness in the next generation. If they don't understand what the issues are, you know, when they go into their careers, they're not going to care about what's happening. And, you know, for example, these are kids from Paterson. We work a lot with Paterson and Newark communities now in our expanded mission. And, you know, these are the kids that are going to live in Paterson. Maybe they're going to serve on their town's board of education. They're going to serve on the township committees. They're going to be in the business community. And Paterson is facing some really very real and major water quality problems. And unless they understand what those issues are, they're not going to be proactive in working towards solutions. So this was, you know, our mission for 30 years, Great Swamp. It's all or part of 10 towns that surround Harding and excuse me, Morris and Somerset County. And then in 2016, we sort of realized that this green area here, and I don't have my little finger pointer, but this green area is the Great Swamp Watershed. So watershed, think bathtub. Bathtubs need a drain. The drain is Millington Gorge. The bath mat, the low point of the watershed, is the Great Swamp National Wildlife Refuge. And we were happy working in that area for 30 years. But we realized that once the water left Millington Gorge, there was no real entity that was working on water protection issues. And we were getting more and more questions and programming from New Providence and Summit and Livingston and Newark. And so in 2016, we expanded our mission, and now we start at the little tiny stream you can step across behind Mendham High School up here on the left of the map, and end where the Passaic meets Newark Bay, and then the Baykeeper takes over. And we work in partnership with both the Baykeeper and the Hackensack Riverkeeper on many issues, especially advocacy issues. So, I've been here for 17 years now, actually this month. And, when we started, the water quality issues that are happening in Harding and Morris Township and Bernardsville are very different from the water quality issues that are happening downstream. The greatest pollution problem in Harding is road salt from winter salting practices. In the downstream sections of the Passaic, it's a Superfund site. So there's orders of magnitude different in terms of the issues that we have to address and the work that we need to do when we work with those communities. And we've had to really learn and grow to make those changes. But much of what we do, much of what I spend my time doing, centers around this program that we developed about 10 years ago called our Watershed Friendly Living program. And the whole idea behind that was that homeowners taking small, simple actions that could improve water quality, water quantity, and by that I mean stormwater, and enhance biodiversity, and that would, be manageable. We're not asking people to go off grid. We're not asking people to, all of a sudden, reduce to net zero their use. But, can you do this one thing? And that program has evolved and expanded until now. Much of the program that we give, absent COVID, is on different, more specific and honed in aspects of our Watershed Friendly Living program. So this is actually just a screenshot from our website. We have a standalone section on our greatswamp.org website where you can click on a different room in the house, learn what some of the water related issues are there and what some of the solutions are. And this is gradually getting bolstered as we build our program out. So what can you do to live watershed friendly? And it really comes down to thinking about what does the water that you use, in your home, and the water that falls and has been falling for many weeks now as rain on your home, where does that water come from? Where does it go when it leaves your home, both internally through the sewer or septic system and externally as runoff? And what kinds of things can it collect along the way? And so by thinking about those things, we can have people focus on the fact that to have healthy streams and to have, high quality drinking water supplies, which we actually have in New Jersey, you need to care for the land around those streams. So our, depending who tells the story, excuse me, we have 1 million people who get their drinking water from the Passaic. That's a very conservative estimate. Up to, if you look at the whole Passaic basin, almost 3 million people who are getting their daily drinking water from surface or aquifer supplies that come from the Passaic watershed. So the more we can do to educate people about keeping water quality high, then the less the water company is going to have to do to clean those supplies up before they ship them off to you through the underground pipes. So there is not a test on this. I have a second year ecology student at college now, and this might be what she's learning about, but the big picture here is just that the more impervious cover you have, the less diversity you have in streams. And it doesn't take much within a watershed or a sub-watershed, much increase in impervious cover, percentage impervious cover, before you really start to see those degradations in water quality. The water gets warmer, there's less shade, there's more nutrients and other non-point source pollutants entering streams. And by the time we're at 20 to 30% impervious cover, which we are in many communities in New Jersey, we have a lot of degraded water quality issues to address. So if you think about stormwater runoff, and this year, our gala is this week, and so Dave Robinson, the state climatologist, is our speaker, and I think it's going to be really interesting to hear what he has to say. In the last 3 years, we've had the wettest year in New Jersey on record, the second wettest year, and I'm interested to see what the 12 months to date are in terms of water volume. Hurricane Ida, the storm that came a couple of weeks before, all of that precipitation is both increasing in amplitude and increasing, there's just sort of increasing storm duration and intensity. And that creates this huge storm water runoff. And so it impacts both the water quality in your neighborhood and beyond into the Passaic system. So, this could have been any one of our houses yesterday, the day before yesterday. I mean, it just feels like we're living in the year of the flood this year. And so, what is happening to that stormwater when it hits the ground? So, any runoff from rainstorms making its way across the surface of the land, especially on impervious cover, is making its way eventually into our streams and from then into the Passaic. And this was Patterson Falls, not during Hurricane Ida. During Hurricane Ida, it was actually much more volume going over the falls. This was actually just after a nor'easter a couple of years ago. So all of that water is making its way, into the system, and often the more downstream communities, don't have places for that water volume to go, and so we start to get flood issues. So, for anybody, I think I'm talking to the choir here, but the difference between pervious and impervious cover, on the left, driveways, concrete, blacktop, those are surfaces where water cannot soak in. It's going to run off the surface, run off quickly, and carry with it any nutrients or other pollutants along the way. On the right is permeable surfaces or pervious cover. And then, the grass on the far right can be both, right? So many people will say, oh, I don't have a problem with impervious surfaces. My lawn is, I have a lawn in my front, and it actually can be that lawn is almost as impervious as the blacktop, because if the soil is compacted, water isn't able to penetrate that grass layer, and the compacted soil that, being mowed while it's wet, or other sort of feet trampling on grass when it's wet, will gradually over time compact that system. So the big picture is that the more impervious cover you have, the more water we have entering streams more rapidly. And on the left is downtown Madison. On the right is a picture from behind the King's shopping center in Bernardsville. And, this is a little teeny tiny stream, but because it's taking all the runoff from the parking lots around the King's complex in a rainstorm, this is like, a fire hydrant or fire hose just, shooting through here and eroding the banks. As you all know, all the soils in this area are glacial soils. They're very erodible soils. And so when you have a lot of water hitting streams quickly, there's a huge amount of erosion power and a huge amount of sediment load. And so the more impervious cover we have, the bigger the problem we have to fix. So we are a landowner, as I mentioned. We own 73 acres in Harding, and we talk about it as the Conservation Management Area, or CMA, and that's floodplain forest. That's forest that is supposed to have, after a heavy rainstorm, standing water, right? It's supposed to be the place where the stream can, go over its banks and, flood the forest, and then slowly infiltrate into the surface layers of the soil and come as base flow back to the stream. But even an area like that can't cope with a Hurricane Ida. So this was last week. We have probably 3,000 feet of boardwalk in that property, and much of it displaced by the 9 inches of rain we got in 5 hours. Now, just imagine if that floodplain, instead of being preserved open space, is Manville, Bound Brook, Somerville, or these other communities that we have built on the floodplains in New Jersey. There was just no place for that flood water to go. And so, we end up with flooded basements, flooded first floors, and in some cases in Manville, flooded second floors. They're in the Raritan watershed, but there's many flood-prone communities in the Passaic as well. Many of the schools I work with in Patterson have more rain closures than they have snow closures. So in Patterson, when it rains, the water is coming up through their toilets in the school bathrooms and flooding to 6 or 8 inches. And that is not just Passaic River water, that's sewage and water. And so huge flooding problems in some of our downstream urban communities. So our solution is to build boardwalk, right? In the last year, we've built almost 1,000 feet of new boardwalk because we've just conducted a big restoration at the property, which is holding more water there. But if you already have extant communities, that's not a viable solution. And Blue Acres can only preserve so much land and get rid of houses to make recharge. So what are we going to do? So our property last year was the recipient of an NRCS restoration grant. It took us 10 years in the making to have the funds and the permits and everything else lined up. And we actually created additional vernal pool or water holding capacity. We added some hardening to the banks of the stream to encourage it to become more sinuous again because it had been straightened or channelized. And then we filled a lot of our mosquito ditches. And so, we're doing our little bit on our 73 acres. We're upstream from the Great Swamp National Wildlife Refuge, which is almost 8,000 acres, doing their bit to store volumes of water. But there's only so much, these pieces of open space can do. What we really need is to be having recharge areas throughout the watershed, even in our urban areas. And that's tough. So what can you do as a homeowner? The first thing is to slow water down as it flows across your property. We tend to have the mindset to, when rain falls on the roof or down onto the blacktop, to convey it away as fast as possible. And actually, if we direct the flow of water within our yards, we can actually recharge quite a lot of it without any additional flood concerns. So something as simple as disconnecting one downspout, which is managing some of your roofline runoff, or taking some portion of your blacktop and sort of diverting it into a bed at the side, instead of conveying it as rapidly as possible to the storm drains off your property, can help to slow the flow down. And when water has less velocity, less energy, it can carry with it fewer nutrients, fewer less sediment, and so it's able to sort of soak in. So the goal here is to mimic a natural system. And if you've ever been to the to the rainforest, whether it's a temperate or a tropical rainforest where you're in primeval forest and you stand under the canopy in a heavy rainstorm, very little of that rainfall is actually reaching the forest floor. It's intercepted by leaves all throughout the canopy. It's slowed. The heavy layers of leaf litter are absorbing and holding like a giant sponge onto that water, and then slowly metering it back out into the streams. And so even in a heavy rainforest, in something like the Hoh rainforest in Washington state, you don't get sediment traveling into the streams, because all of that vegetation, all of that organic material is trapping and holding onto the water. And so that's sort of what we need to mimic, right? And in my neighborhood, I live in South Plainfield. In my neighborhood, all I hear are chainsaws from the tree guys coming to remove mature trees that were doing a very good job of intercepting rainfall and slowing and recharging. And instead, people don't like to clean up the leaves, and so they're replacing them with pom-pom topiary evergreens, which do nothing for water holding. So in a natural system, some of the water's just going straight right back up as evaporation or being transpired through the plant. Some of it's going into the shallow soil layers and flowing back into streams, but about a quarter of it's going deep into the ground. And that's what we need to be figuring out how to replicate. So, those things that we can do in urban communities that replicate those natural systems, we term green infrastructure. And our organization is working increasingly on educating urban communities and underserved communities about what is green infrastructure and what can you do instead of engineering solutions to put, real life green living thing solutions. And it's everything from green roofs, which are expensive but are very sexy to talk about, to bio swales and buffers, or rain gardens. And we've actually put to date 5 rain gardens in schools in Paterson as demonstrations, but most of those schools were 100% blacktop schools that now are not. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later and what some of those other benefits are. But unless we start addressing these issues and funding these infrastructure issues as green solutions, instead of just saying, oh gosh, Paterson floods, it's terrible every time it rains, things are only going to get worse as we increase development in New Jersey and as our climate continues to oscillate to wetter and heavier storms. So increasing in your own yard, and here you probably know all of this anyway, but increasing recharge areas for water in your own yard something as simple as just putting an extender onto your downspout into an existing bed, so you don't need to water that bed, and so that water's not going into storm drain, or excavating some of your yard to become a rain garden, which is really just a shallow depression that can store water temporarily and then allow it to filter down. So we do a lot of programming, normally in person, but we've done it over Zoom from my back garden. I've been in the playground and the kids have been in their bedroom. We've tried every kind of model over the last 18 months to do programming with schools about, what's the water quality issue, and then to have them sort of be masters of their own solution. Where we have funding in place to put in a rain garden, we work with students to help them understand what plants go where in the different wetness zones of a rain garden. And also, wow, if you have this opportunity to put in native plants, here are all these other benefits that they can provide as pollinator resources and winter seed sources and habitat in a place where you didn't have much. And so we have been the recipient of several funds that have allowed us to put in these demonstration gardens. We've partnered with Rutgers to do some of the bigger ones that involve de-paving areas. But that's the future, and they need to be more than just demonstration gardens. They need to be, really functional rain garden management across the whole of Paterson. And, at the rate we're going right now, those are slow steps, but slowly Paterson administration is realizing that, they're going to have to do something to address this flooding. And so, every place where they can depave or allow tree planting or, buffers to be put in is going to help with their flood management. So this is a rain garden that we put in with the students of PS28, which is the gifted and talented school in Paterson. The kids chose the plants. That's what we ordered from Pinelands Nursery, and then they planted them. And so they had this mindset that they were taking care of the garden. We worked with William Paterson students, and there was this great interaction between the students and the kids from PS28 about what's life like in college, and it had all these other additional ramifications. But it was a great project because it took 100% blacktop area with runoff going straight into storm drains that are connected to the sewer system in Paterson and disconnected about a quarter of that playground's runoff. So the second thing that we can do is reducing what stormwater picks up along the way. So reducing your non-point source pollution. And there's lots of different things that contribute to non-point source or people pollution. Those are the fertilizers, the pesticides, the road salt. And, I was just in home, I call it Home Despot, but I was in Home Depot last week, and, listening to the guy in the store recommending weed and feed and this and that products to people. And so just understanding a little bit more about the chemistry of soil and how plants uptake fertilizers can be super helpful. You obviously know, about the damage of pesticides, but, something as simple as testing your soil. I talk to garden clubs all the time, and it's amazing to me how many people have never tested their soil. They're just relying on what the gardener says or the landscaping company. It's a $10 kit. Test your soil, see what it's deficient in, and only put those chemicals on that it needs. Know how to read the bag so that you know how to apply, what rate to apply. The analogy we always use is, if you take one multivitamin a day and that's good for you, taking 10 a day is not better for you. There's only so much that your body can absorb, and plant roots are the same. So, my neighbor across the street, who for 20 years I've watched fertilize immediately before a storm because he feels like the rain is going to carry that fertilizer down to the plant roots. It's not. The fertilizer is going to run off, it's going to hit your storm drain, and it's going to fertilize the stream. And so he wonders why his grass always looks, terrible, has fungus and all these other problems, because he's not actually understanding what its needs are and just fertilizing or adding inputs when it needs it. So, reading the label, only applying when you need, what you need, and looking at your soil to tell you what you need is really helpful. When we look at non-point source pollution, the easiest way to talk about non-point source pollution is often to use trash as the example, because that's the visual thing that people can see. But, you know, many of the biggest pollutants in the Passaic River watershed are the things that you can't see. So, you know, salt from winter road salting is a huge problem both upstream and down. We work with DPWs and municipalities to talk about conversion to brine, which is when you mix road salt and water and apply before the storm. That can use 1/10 of the road salt that just rock salt uses. There's some upfront costs, but it can often in the snowy winters we've had in the last few years can pay back in 2 or 3 years. And so building community understanding of, you know, why the town needs some infrastructure money to change over to brining and what that means. You're not going to see the trucks out during a storm, you're going to see them out the day before. That can save money on overtime costs, but it can also reduce the salt that's flushing into the stream every time it rains. Keeping pet waste from water bodies. So, you know, during COVID, when we're all recreating close to home and everybody's home much more, you know, we've been seeing this massive increase in pet waste bags at the entrance to parks and natural areas, which I don't understand at all. If you take the trouble to put it into a bag, why do you not take the trouble to take it home? But getting people to understand the fact that, you know, every piece of land surface is part of a water body, is part of a watershed that's draining into a water body somewhere. And so if you pick up your poop, your pet's poop on the street, then you need to be picking it up in your backyard also, because we live in environments that are so urban that natural systems cannot address all of that high nitrogen, high bacterial load that comes from pet waste. So, you know, I've seen people kick it to the storm drain. That's not a good idea. You need to be, you know, horrible and plastic laden as it is, picking up your pet waste and binning it so it can go to the landfill rather than going into our water bodies. And what we're seeing is that one of our water quality tests is to do bacterial monitoring in the areas where sort of people and wildlife are intersecting. So, you know, the trails at Lewanika Reservation where many dog walkers are, places where people are swimming, but there's also high goose populations. The EEC where I used to work, where they're doing canoeing programs, but there's also high goose numbers. And we, when we do our bacterial monitoring, are finding these incredibly high levels of bacteria. I forget what the number is, but it's something like 1 gram of dog poop can have 3 million E. coli. You know, the numbers are staggering. So clean up after your pet. There's no excuse. And sort of understanding and building understanding in communities, the impact of what you leave on the surface of the land and how that can make its way to streams is a big piece of what we spend our time doing. So these are a couple of pictures of kids at the top are Patterson. They're looking at macroinvertebrates, and the macroinvertebrates that live in the stream tell the story of water quality year round. We go out and we sample chemistry quarterly, but you know, that gives us a snapshot of what's happening on that day. It doesn't tell us what's happening year round. The macros that live there have to be able to cope with the best and the worst condition. And so, you know, building that understanding of what lives in the stream is indicative of the water quality. Okay, so time to unmute. I want you to think about your local neighborhood. How does it stack up for biodiversity? How is it after a rainstorm? And, you know, what pollutants is your town, you know, contributing to the river? So, you know, think of like your street or your neighborhood and think of one thing that you might have seen that is a water quality impairment that's coming from your neighborhood. And then if I put you onto grid, you could just shout out something that you might have seen. That way I know you're still awake.
Well, Hazel, this is Sharon. We're
Hey,
out
Sharon.
here. We're in semi-rural Sussex County, and I would say that the horse and cattle waste probably exceeds the pet waste out here.
Okay.
And there's very, you know, you see monumental manure piles, and it's very discouraging sometimes. There's no very little control over that kind of thing.
Yeah, so, you know, in different communities, agricultural waste, I mean, if you go to the Midwest, you know,
Yeah.
farms, I mean, my husband Emil, you know, did his graduate work in Wisconsin where huge cow farms were, you know, the number one nitrogen input into streams, right, from all that poop. But, you know, buffering streams or just managing waste differently. We don't have many agricultural communities in the Passaic River watershed, but still managing waste, you know, organic waste, keeping it away from streams, having buffers, having sort of, you know, sediment ponds and places where some of that high nitrogen waste can flow and not flow directly into the stream. Yeah, for sure, that would be helpful. Anything else?
Actually, it's Donna, it's still in Sussex County. So there used to be some programming through the ag community, I guess NRCS, if I recall, to do streamside fencing, you know, buffers to keep the animals away from the streams. But there was never enough money in fencing, you know, to go around for the farmers that wanted to use it. And, you know, we tried to educate them, just as, you know, you mentioned, as Sharon mentioned, about the importance of keeping the animals away from those streams. And then the other issue was the farmers that did put the fencing in, if it washed out, if we had a significant flooding issue and it washed away, it was their responsibility to then fix it or to, you know, restore it. So there are definitely challenges, you know.
Yeah, so we worked with the NRCS on this restoration, and you know, they're not easy to work with. I hope there's nobody from the NRCS on this call, but they're not easy to work with. It's very bureaucratic, and I could understand why farmers, you know, would just choose not to engage. You get this pot of money to spend, but there's so many limitations and rules and regulations to work with it that, you know, some farmers I can imagine would just say, you know, it's just not worth it for me. And we were several times at that point where, yes, we were going to conduct this huge restoration, but, you know, to do it to an engineer's specification rather than a biologist specification was just, you know, was tough sometimes. And I had to bring the heavy hitter, you know, I bring Emil along to rant and rave at the engineers so that they could pull back from some of the engineering solutions that they wanted to impose rather than biological solutions. So, okay, so let's think what else. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask a question. There are a number of horse boarding stables in Sussex County. I'm from up here too. So what is the best thing to do with the horse manure?
So we worked with Morris County Stables in, I guess it's the Loanica, the stables that are on Loanica in Morristown. It's part of Morris County Park Commission, but they work with, I guess they outsource their stables. And, you know, the horses were being, I don't know the correct term. So, you know, they were being pastured close to the stream. They love to go walk right into the stream. So they were causing a lot of trampling, a lot of erosion. But the biggest nutrient input, we tested, we did water quality testing every, you know, 150 yards upstream all the way downstream. And for many years, we had thought that it was the wastewater treatment plant producing all the nitrogen. And we were complaining that the wastewater treatment plant wasn't working properly. When in actual fact, it was the manure pile wasn't being, they weren't buffering it to keep the, for want of a better word, liquids away from running into the stream. So just, you know, their manure management program, there are best management practices for how far it needs to be away from a water source, so that it's covered, so that when it rains, you know, the rain is not flushing nitrogen into the stream. So simple things like that can make a big difference. And soil conservation districts can often be helpful in addressing nutrient as well as sediment problems. And so, you know, if there's, you know, I have a slide later, you know, don't be afraid to be a tattletale to the, anonymously to the Soil Conservation Service. And that can often result in a change that can make a big water quality. There are rules and regulations that these agencies, farmers have to follow. And so, you know, there are solutions that they're supposed to be following. Often it's just more convenient to make a big mulch pile or a big poop pile, and
And-
where it happens to be. Okay.
And the other thing is you could
Yep.
always reach out to your Rutgers Cooperative Agriculture
Sure.
Extension agent,
Whoever's the
because
extension
there,
agency.
right, there are CAFO
absolutely.
rules, for just what we're discussing now. And those agents need to be notified if there's a problem, because they have to administer the new rules.
Yep, for sure. So reducing erosion and sediment entering our streams, that's a huge issue, especially because the Passaic soils are so subject to erosion. We don't think of soil as being a pollutant, but when it enters a stream and it chokes the stream or shallows out a lake, or blocks the gills of a little fish, freshwater fish, because there's so much soil in the water column, it is a non-point source pollutant. So something as simple as making sure that you're protecting bare areas on the downslope side with either silt fences or straw bales can really make a huge difference. Buffering, and as I mentioned before, calling, I call all the time. I'm sort of the most annoying person. I have the Morris County Soil Conservation number on speed dial, and as I drive through Great Swamp on my way to and from work, when I see, especially in Chatham and Madison, where many houses are being torn down and rebuilt, and they're not doing soil preservation, and when that soil resource is gone, it's gone, but it's entering our streams and causing problems along the way. And so, stopping that at source, stopping the runoff at source, that's the job of the Soil Conservation Service. In a positive way, addressing runoff, sediment erosion and runoff by planting buffers, just taller vegetation strips, and their roots and their stems can trap a lot of sediment. So this is actually a buffer we have between ourselves and our neighbors, and our neighbors are from Staten Island originally. They would like it if there was no living thing in their yard, and so their grass, which gets mown every week in summer, no matter whether we're having a drought or a flood, is eroding. The soil is so dry sometimes that there's just dust flying everywhere, and so we planted a buffer strip so that we're on the downslope side from them. I don't want their soil entering our wildflower meadow, and so we trap it in this buffer strip. And they also have the benefit of acting as valuable habitat and creating sort of connectivity, as you know. But not all buffers are created equal. So a lot of the native perennials that are multiple stem, they have really deep roots. They're much more effective at trapping soil and sediment, and avoiding invasive species, which we've managed a lot in the property that we own and manage, but they often grow in typical buffer areas, stream banks, stream corridors, the edges of roads. They're not as great at trapping some of these non-point source pollutants as our native species. And as we know, changing soil and water chemistry can also favor invasive species. And so one of the things that we've been doing at the conservation management area, we fenced 16 years ago, 30 acres. And that has made a huge difference to water quality, just to keep the deer out and to slowly remove invasives within the fence. We're seeing how much natural vegetation, when it covers the surface of the land, can really improve the water quality of an area as the rainfall flows across the surface. So reducing your property's lawn area, we work a lot with communities in Madison and Summit to think about taking some of that green desert and creating no-mow and more grow areas. They reduce work, they reduce watering and nutrient inputs, and they also have the benefit of providing valuable wildlife habitat. This is a rain garden we put up at our office, which is next to Jockey Hollow. This is actually many moons ago now, but this is the front of our house. We took away our front yard and put in a wildflower meadow in the first year. This was mostly cosmos. It's evolved quite a lot since then. Creating just simple, instead of having the grass lawn go up to the base of the tree, taking the lawn back to have a rough infiltration base at an infiltration area at the base of the tree. And you can see coming in on the right here is actually an extension, a downspout extension that takes runoff from our roof and actually, puts it into the base of the tree. So we never need to supplemental water, and we manage a lot of the runoff coming from our property on our property. you know, eventually, if we have a big storm, if we have a Hurricane Ida, is it going to find its way onto into the storm drain? For sure. But we can take away some of the lawn area and create low maintenance beds that have a massive impact in reducing runoff. So our yards are long in the back. Our neighbors on either side have nothing but grass. And in Hurricane Ida, we had 2 lakes on either side of us because all of the grass, you know, pretty compacted. The only thing that drives on it is the lawnmower. And those roots are pretty shallow and we have a pretty heavy soil. Native plant roots are super deep. Some of the trees and shrubs also have really deep roots. And so they break up that soil and allow water to soak in, as well as having more leaf litter and humus in the surface layers of the soil. So we didn't have any standing water after Ida. We did have some water in our basement, but we didn't have standing water. Whereas we had these, you know, lakes for 10 days after Ida on either side of us. And so we see the benefit of what native plants can do to break up soil and allow infiltration and filter that water. And a part of that is changing your mowing and your watering regimes. So something as simple to increasing the blade height. If you do your own lawn, you know, just putting the blade up higher. So, you know, there's a little lever that you can increase the height of. If you have a landscaper, telling them that that's what you want to do, it can be a difficult conversation, but the landscaper works for you. And so telling them that you want your grass to be higher allows more shading. It allows the grass to be healthier, to produce deeper roots, and to be sort of a more healthy living plant. You could, if you are not able to deal with that, consider putting a no-mow or alternate cycle mow strip around the edges of your yard so that, you know, you keep some of it short, but you keep a perimeter that's a little bit taller, and that can act to trap a lot of nutrients also. And, you know, getting landscapers to grass cycle is tough, but there are more and more landscaping companies that have been through Rutgers environmental training where they're looking at organic and less damaging environmental practices for landscaping. And they will understand about when you say, I want you to, apart from the first cut of the year, just leave the grass clippings and allow them to mulch. They're going to, you know, add water holding capacity in the soil. They're going to add some ability for the clippings to shade the bare soil and stop evapotranspiration and hold on to the water there much more, so that you need to water less, even in these droughts that we're having in the summer. So, okay, quiz time again. I want to ask you, what's the average household water use per day in New Jersey homes in gallons? How many gallons does the typical New Jersey home use every day? You can just shout out what you think is the number. How many gallons of water does a typical New Jersey home use every 24 hours? You're going to need to unmute and just shout me something out. Let me know you're still living. No guesses? Okay, so it's actually almost 300 gallons per day is the typical average use for New Jersey. And about 70% of that water use, which is all cleaned and treated to these super high standards, about 70% of that use is inside uses. And the number one thing that uses water inside your house, anybody have an idea what that might be? What's the number one thing that we do inside our homes that takes water?
Toilet.
Absolutely, right? Toilet flushing. If you have an old-fashioned toilet, it's up to 6 gallons per flush. Some of the more modern flushers are 1.5 gallons. So if you think about it, we take water from New Jersey American or whoever your provider is, we clean it to drinking water standards, and then we flush it away, right? That just is sort of crazy. So, you know, switching to more efficient toilets can help. If you have an old toilet, putting just, you can buy these water balloons that displace some of the water and use fewer gallons. That can help you save water so that we're using less water inside our homes. And our website has a lot of links to sort of water saving devices that you can retrofit instead of, you know, going out to buy a whole new thing. but that can reduce your water use extensively. Conserving water in your yard, means if you apply less water, first of all, you're not applying treated drinking water to your plants. You're using less water, but there's also less runoff. And so doing something as simple as mulching your beds, don't water during the midday. Our neighbor has water timers, and they come on at 11 a.m. and they go off at 2 every day. And he wastes probably a half of the water that he's applying is just evaporating in the middle of the summer. An easy trick is to put a coffee can in the middle of your lawn if you have a sprinkler, and just when it gets to be an inch deep, you're done. Your yard is watered. Choosing plants obviously that require less water. Grass is really water dependent. There are different mixes that you can put in that need less water. You can have less lawn. You can treat your lawn differently to need less water. But just something as simple as angling the sprinkler system down so that less of the water is going into the air and evaporating can make a huge difference. Using drip hose rather than an irrigation sprinklers can make a huge difference. And then, as we mentioned before, disconnecting downspouts to infiltrate beds, means that when you don't have to pay for water, when it's coming from rainfall, you're saving water use, and you're also keeping that water from storm drains and streams. And then this is where you guys know your stuff, so we'll whiz through this. Obviously everything that you do in your yard that improves your yard, it looks like improves your yard for pollinators, is going to protect biodiversity in the watershed. So you don't need to go all the way and have a whole wildflower meadow. It could be something as simple as replacing your annuals with perennials, replacing some of your burning bush or privet with dogwoods or blueberries. They tend to use less in the way of inputs because they're locally adapted. And our organization, for the first time this year, held a Plants for Pollinators sale. We partnered with 10 different environmental commissions or green groups and 7 different nonprofit organizations, sort of all around, mostly in the Passaic watershed, a couple in the Raritan. Next year, we're going to do it again, and we're going to be working down with Essex County. And so we had almost 450 people purchase plants from us and sold 14,000, way more than we thought we were going to sell native plugs. And that's going to increase for 50% for next year. And those native species, are going to do what, if you're an acolyte of Doug Tallamy, planting natives in your yard, making these beads on a chain that connect native species rich habitats is going to mean that the biodiversity increases. We all know those facts about how many bugs a pair of chickadees needs to raise a brood, but unless we are actually changing our neighbors' behavior, we're not going to make a biodiversity difference. So this is actually my neighbor. This is Angel's yard, right? She's lived here for 30 years. She has nothing in her yard. Just imagine the goldfinches that are using our backyard. When they go over the fence, there's nothing for them. Just imagine if she put in a patch of coneflower or some other seed-bearing plant that these goldfinches could feed on. So, we are doing a lot of programming right now on creating biodiverse, insect-friendly yards, educating about the damaging effects of neonics, and trying to encourage homeowners to think about wildlife as they're thinking about, what to put in their yards. So working with local nurseries, developing native plant lists, and the plant sale obviously is the major one. But we're doing the same thing in the schoolyards that we work with. So this is the same rain garden. The top picture is that same rain garden you saw the kids planting. Now, instead of 100% blacktop schoolyard, we're 4 years in. This year there were monarchs. We went to weed it because, of course, the kids haven't been in session for 18 months. We went to weed it, and there were praying mantis and monarchs and clouded sulfurs and both monarch caterpillars and chrysalises. It was a fantastic place to look at biodiversity right smack in the middle of Paterson. And so as the neighbors come by, they can see that both this is a rain garden, it's managing stormwater, but it's also, there's a really, cool wildlife that you can see around here as well. So the goal is to have sort of every yard provide some increase in terms of wildlife resources. And I'm speaking to the choir there when I talk to you guys. Of course, you know that. So making watershed friendly decisions in your cleaning products can also benefit water quality, especially if you're on septic. So some of our communities in the upstream section are septic and well, and you have to be super careful about what you're purchasing. And we'll have watershed friendly living programs just to look at what kinds of chemicals are in cleaning products and what can we remove from those, what choices can we make that remove those products from our homes, and what impact does that have? And I would say the main thing to do is to connect with an organization called the Environmental Working Group, which lists the ingredients of more than 2,500 products and can tell you which ones have less environmentally damaging chemicals in them. Something as simple as looking at the labels, reading the labels. If you can't pronounce it, the chances are it's not great. But the thing that I would say personally is, as a homeowner, a simple switch you can make is to avoid fragrance, artificial fragrance. That has a hugely damaging impact both to your own health and to some of the chemicals that stabilize the fragrance are things called PFAs, which are these forever chemicals that are causing many problems, and we're starting to test for in the Passaic. And then finally, visiting and using the Watershed Friendly Living website that we have. We're building resources there. We're building as we give, presentations on specific things like, what to do with all the things that you can't recycle, where can you put them, or, specifically more detail about how to make decisions about what products to use, how to garden, more water conservation wise, those kinds of things. We're trying to put up there as resources and put links to different agencies and entities where you can get more information. And so that's all on our website at the greatswamp.org, and then it has its own tab for watershed friendly living. So, the big picture is that protecting current and future water resources, saving you money, saving water, which at the moment it doesn't seem to be a limited resource, but actually in parts of New Jersey is. Greenscaping your home to sort of build climate resiliency and start protecting and hardening your home against a changing climate, and then conserving the safety of your drinking water. Those are really the main things that we talk about when we talk about watershed friendly living. And so with that, if anybody has any questions, hopefully I didn't talk you to sleep too much. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. I'll stop sharing.
Any questions for Hazel? That was a super informative presentation, very, very timely. Questions out there? Just unmute, raise your hand, join us.